want to play you a clip from Valuetainment with Neil Degrasse Tyson, somebody who I think is an incredibly intelligent man, astrophysicist, and how he creates the frame of an argument that makes it virtually impossible to win. So I'm going to play the clip. I might chime in on occasion. It's not that long. It's less than 4 minutes. And then we'll be discussed where I can isolate what he's doing at the end, maybe in the middle of it as well. Here we go.
Did we not learn during COVID and all the stimulus and the free money that maybe printing money and free money isn't the best solution for people? Like using UBI as an example?
Allow me to comment on that.
Yes, sir. Feel free.
Okay. What you're not considering is, okay. So we have this inflation, all right? This past year is 8% or whatever. It'd probably be lower this year, but still 8%. Well, yeah, we were printing money. And so that there was
8%, by the way, my friends, is the inflation that the CPI states. In reality, if you take a look at housing prices, eggs, goods that people actually are desiring rather than just Netflix streaming, the inflation rate was much higher. They do all sorts of shenanigans in order to hide the real inflation rate.
Some inevitability to that. So people who don't like the politics of that argue against that and saying we shouldn't have printed money. What was the fucking alternative? You don't have money and you get kicked out of your home and you don't have a job?
I'll tell you what the alternative was. The alternative was not to shut down the economy to begin with. And here we have the start of what I will be presenting when we complete this segment. But this is a presupposition that the correct frame was to shut everything down, and then everything by extension becomes much easier for Neil and anybody else who's doing this to argue back.
Ask yourself, suppose we didn't do that. And the entire industry that required people to leave their homes and pay money at a restaurant, at a shopping mall, at every place that required people's presence. They would be out of a job and homeless. Oh, let's do that, because that's a better solution than having a little bit of inflation 2 years after you have a stimulus package. People don't do enough thinking.
Again, he is presupposing the fact that shutting down was the correct thing to do, which we know was just an imitation of the Chinese model that was brought to us by our thought leaders like Dr. Fauci and everybody who wanted to get Donald Trump out of office. So everything that he's saying from now is presupposing that that was the right tactic to take, and he's putting it in that frame.
About what other consequences would have taken place had decisions been different. It's not just simply don't do the package, that way we won't have a little bit of inflation a few years later. That's not really the metric that's going on at that time. Think it through. Now, if you can say, I'd rather not have the inflation, and I don't mind millions of people kicked out of their residence, homeless, with no job, then that's a decision, as long as it's an informed decision. You can prefer that. It's a free country. You can prefer that and vote that way. For me, we have the power to print the money, keeping people in a job through the...
And by the way, the United States is really the only power in the world that has that ability to do so without creating massive amounts of inflation, because we're able to export it to the rest of the planet.
The crisis, I think that was one of the wisest decisions, economic decisions that could have been made at the time. And I guess that's my opinion.
No, and that's perfectly fine. When you say think it through, who would disagree with that? You know how like they do like in South Korea, they with the help of U.S. forces, they do war games. Okay, well if China does this and we're going to do this, and they do through a thousand different ways of seeing what happens.
Military,
these war games, all these things that happen, and then different methodologies, different. Why don't they do stuff like that with like COVID? It's like, okay, cool. If we're going to lock down the world and we can't have money, we don't have jobs, and everyone's losing their jobs, all right, we're going to print money. Like, why doesn't the government do something like that in terms of like war games? So like the next time COVID happens, because it'll
the
probably
problem is-
happen.
The problem
We
is
don't have to print all this money
it was a
again.
once in a century.
We hope, knock on wood,
Well, statistically, it was once in a century.
Yes.
The previous one was
a
100.
black swan event.
The previous one was 100 years
Right.
earlier, and so we went a century without a pandemic. So I don't know that solutions we put into place today
Mhm.
would be the solutions we would choose 100 years from now in a next pandemic. So yes, the scenarios are good to explore. Yes, you can ask how much money was pulled out of the stock market when society closed down. That was that V drop that we took.
Yeah.
And by the way, the market went back up within 18 months. It was higher than it was the
Yeah.
day before it dropped.
6 months.
Yeah,
Boom.
was it that quick? I
Yes.
forgot. I forgot it was even that quick. Thank
Yes.
6
you.
months.
The V recovery, they call it.
So when Neil is talking about the V-shaped recovery of the stock market, that is only due to the fact that they printed massive amounts of money. Real wealth is driven by an increase in productivity and products. You had supply chain disruptions. You had people that were out of work, businesses that closed. It had nothing to do with increased productivity and everything to do with the printing of money. You see, inflation is theft. Imagine that you've saved up a ton of money and you are playing the game of life of Monopoly, and suddenly the banker comes in and he floods everybody that hasn't saved with massive amounts of money, making what you've saved, the cash, worthless. This is why the price of stocks rose, is because that money was seeking a home of a scarce and limited supply. It's why Bitcoin shot up. It's why the housing market increased in value so substantially by nominal terms, because you have added dollars that are flooding in to the nation, into the world. And the US is the only country, as I mentioned earlier, that is able to do that and export the inflation, because we are the world's reserve currency. Thus, once again, inflation is theft of your saved money, because when you contribute economic benefit to somebody, they give you what should be a crystallized token known as money, which you can then store and exchange at a later date. But because of the incentives offered by the inflationary Federal Reserve and the government that wants to print money to make the money worthless that they borrowed, and thus the people getting paid back aren't getting paid back in the same value in terms of the dollars lent. This is why it happens and why it is theft. So to the larger point that I wanted to make about presuppositions, embedded in Neil's argument, as I mentioned earlier, is the idea that the only thing that made sense was to shut down the economy, to put everybody out of work. And we know that that is not the case, because places like Florida, like Sweden, did not do this and are far better off economically than other jurisdictions, mainly the blue ones, that did so. And embedded in his argument is that presupposition that you had to shut down the entire economy, and then what choice did you have but to dole out free money to people and to rob those who saved and inflate assets. While Main Street was hurting, Wall Street went up 30%. They could do nothing, sit back, kick back, and collect the nominal increases in their assets worth, but everybody on Main Street got hammered and they got a tiny sliver of that amount of money. But once again, Neil is presupposing, and when you set the frame of the argument that this must have taken place, so it's akin to me saying, when's the last time that you beat your wife? Embedded in that is the presupposition that you had previously beaten your wife. And when I say that to a packed house, that is what they presuppose, and then that presupposition has to be dealt with immediately. So in this argument, because he's able to frame it as such in order to get the audience to presuppose that what originally took place was the correct action to have taken, then it becomes much easier to argue for the money spigot churning and doling out all that free money to Wall Street. That is what Neil is doing. So whenever you see a presupposition in an argument, just be aware, and we all do it. Everybody's done it at some point in their lives, but it is an argumentative technique, a debate technique that just slides under the radar for most people, and then you set the playing field as such that everything else goes downhill for you in terms of your argumentation. So just something for you guys to be aware of and catch those presuppositions when somebody is trying to use that as a tactic. It's a sales tactic, for example. Would you rather have the dress in yellow or in green? It presupposes that you want the dress. It's thinking past the sale. And it's a sales tactic that has gone on, but it's an example of the use of a presupposition that you actually want the item in question. And it happens all the time, and I just want you guys to be aware of it. So if you guys got something positive out of this, if I introduced a new concept to you, if I framed it in a way that you could understand, please leave me a comment, because I love to hear those things. And after you hit the like button, please, by all means, share this video. You see, I'm assuming after you've hit the like button, that's the presupposition embedded in that statement. Peace out. Have a fantastic day.